It's nice to see faces that we met over the weekend, and on Sunday was very, very, very special. And it was great to see many of you. And we're starting now the third chapter of Masechet Avot. And I'm wondering whether after Sunday we can be a little more Beit Midrashic. In other words, can we try to have a learning that is a little more inclusive, a little more with everybody feeling free to say their opinion and intervene. And I think we will just start off. I'll share the screen for the first Mishnah of the third Perek. So I'll just give a quick introduction to the third chapter. The first and the second chapter of Masechet Avot are very, I would say, in a way, orderly. We went through the different the generations of the Tanaim, the generations of the rabbis who wrote the Mishnah in the first Perek, until Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the person who wrote the Mishnah, who gathered the Mishnah and put it in writing. And we went through what they said pretty much according to the order of those rabbis along the generations. The second chapter was concentrated around the students of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, more or less. But when we are getting to the third chapter, it seems a little less orderly. And there are a few ideas of how exactly these Mishnayot, these sayings of different rabbis, are organized around. I didn't see any good enough reason to share with you. But I think it's an opportunity to see the Mishnayot actually less in context and more to try to see every Mishnah, what exactly it says. So we won't try, at least on this week, to put it in context and more to just face this idea. I can say that in the third chapter, we're talking about big things. We'll see it. We're talking about also in the previous chapters. It's not exclusively in the third chapter, but I would say that if in the previous chapters we had different Mishnayot talking about different issues of Jewish life, of Jewish community, of a few Mishnayot that were aiming to a certain situation, like towards a judge or towards a teacher or towards someone who wants to teach their children different things. This chapter talks about really big things, like the things that are asking the big questions. And I don't know if it's really a guideline to a title for this chapter, but it certainly is a lot of food for thought. So we'll start the first Mishnah of the third chapter, Akavya ben Mahalalel. Would anybody like to read it in English? So I will read it.
I can read it, no problem.
Yeah, please.
Akavya ben Mahalalel said, keep in mind three things, and you will not come into the hands of sin. Know from where you came and to where you are going, and before whom you will have to give an account and a reckoning. From where did you come? From a putrid drop. And to where are you going? To a place of dust, worms, and maggots. And before whom will you have to give an account and a reckoning? Before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He.
Thank you very much. So, Akavia ben Mahalalel deals with a question that I might say that we all have, and I hope we will never lose, which is, how am I refraining from sin, right? How am I getting away from the hands of sin? And this is an eternal question. You know, the Tanakh says that there is no person in the world, there's no righteous person in the world who will do good and will never sin. En tzaddik ba'aretz asher yaseh tov v'lo yachta. Everybody sins. Everybody is, it's hard for everybody to maintain a straight path. And before we get to Akavia ben Mahalalel's answer, I think this question is a question we should linger on. How am I refraining from sin? Do we have a goal not to sin ever? Is that something that we need to aspire for? What do you think about that? This is only the question. Well, Akavia ben Mahalalel says, I'll give you the answer. How can you refrain from sin? But what do you think about that, about this subject, about dealing with this question of can I refrain from sin, and how can I refrain from sin? Okay, so
I have an aspect.
yes.
I read that, or I aspect where it said that the person that if you have a goal and if you are in a mood of happiness, you are less inclined to sin.
So this is already a suggestion of how to refrain from sin. You're adding another idea to what Akavia ben Mahalalel says, and we'll get there soon. There are a few other sources that we will see of how to refrain from sin. But I've asked the question a bit before even. Is that a goal, to refrain from sin? What do you think about this this idea? Should I deal with how to refrain from sin? Should I deal with this idea that I would not sin?
Yeah, I remember in the period of Yom Kippur, we had the shiur speaking of this subject, and that we learned the meaning of the sin by committing the sin. That is that there is a in the tshuva we learn the meaning of the sin and why there is a sense. So maybe there is a sense of maybe not promoting to do the sin, but maybe there is a
There's a purpose for the sin. Yeah. Any other thoughts about this? Yes, so really asking ourselves, how can we refrain from sin, is a question that that inherently, when we're talking about doing mitzvot, then we're thinking about how not to do avirot, not to do sins, right? And one of the things that we're asking ourselves, I think, at least I'm asking myself, is there a way, a dogmatic way, or a systematic way, how to refrain from sin, how to not sin, because in principle, we're made out of deeds. The Judaism is a action-based religion, and so when we do good, this is good. When we're not doing good, we're doing bad things. And we know that in Bereshit, in Genesis, already in the beginning, God says, "Ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra mineuраv," that a man from his childhood, his bad inclination is very active. Yetzer lev ha'adam ra mineuраv. And so, in a way, at least in this view, we are built in a way that naturally we're not looking to do good. Naturally, we're not looking to do good, or maybe we're looking to do good, but we are tending to drift away naturally. It's easier for us to drift away. It's easier for us to go to the sides, not walk on the main road, not walk on the good road. And then the question is, what do we do? How can we find ourselves in the way? How can we find ourselves doing good? How can we refrain from the sin? Since this is not the natural way of things. And the Kavya ben Malalel says, I've got an idea. Look in 3 things and you will not come into the hands of sins. Know from where you came and to where you are going, and before whom will you give an account and reckoning. So there are 3.
I am thinking of something.
Yeah.
When we are praying in this Shacharit,
Mm-hmm.
we are talking about we are born with a pure soul, and keep in mind that you shall keep it. And how do you do that? By loving people, giving love, and try
Mm-hmm.
to do the best from the commandments.
Mm-hmm.
I would keep that all the time. I think it would be good.
So you're offering an alternative answer. You're saying, how could you refrain from sin? Concentrate on love, right? Concentrate on loving others.
Yeah.
Yes. So great. So let's keep that in mind, Cecilia, because I will soon ask all of us to think, what would we give as the best recipe for refraining from sin? But let's think about it after we look at what he says and see if that works for us, or to see what does that mean to us. So he says you should know where you came from, where you're going, and who you will, in front of who will you give an account. How are those 3 things refraining us from sin? I think it's pretty simple, right? If you know where you're from, if you're keeping in mind where you came from and where you're going, and that you will have to give reckoning. You have to give an account to someone, and that someone is of course God. Then you won't sin anymore. What do you think? Is that a good recipe? If we keep that in mind, we will not sin at all? Gisa Sara, you wanted to ask or to say something?
Yeah, I don't know if it's related, but I think like how to keep your values and how to understand that you will at some point make mistakes, but you gotta be responsible for what you do and also for the consequences. I mean, in general, but it's also, in my opinion, it sounds also related to that. Like, if you know where you come from, you know your values. And in this case, you know your values as a Jewish person. You know where you're going, and you know exactly who is your creator, who is your father, who is Hashem. So you have at some point to just say like this, like, answer for your actions, for everything in your life, you know, spiritually and mentally, physically, and things like that. So that's how I say it's like knowing where you're from. It's most like what kind of values you have, and you should stick to it. You should not skip it. But apparently, I at least think, I don't know if I'm right, but yes, we will do mistakes. We're human beings. We will mistake. And maybe it's even meant to that, so we can learn, but not to repeat our mistakes. To learn from it and not repeat it, and make ourselves better and better every day. That's what I think.
Thank you. But what's interesting to me, it's connecting to the question I asked before, is what you are saying is, I need to understand that I will give account to everything. This is knowing that that my actions have consequences, and knowing what having values. If I'm doing something good, I know it's good. If I'm doing something bad, I know it's bad, and I should do tshuva, or I should reconcile, and so on and so forth. And I identified very much with what you said. Here, I think he's working on preventing, right? He's trying to state some kind of recipe that will prevent us from sinning. It will prevent us from getting into the question of what are the consequences of my deeds. He wants to say, if we will do this, we will not sin. Yeah, keep in mind three things, and you will not come into the hands of sin. So I identify with what you say, Gisa Sala, but I think that here there's something from a different area, an area of wanting not to sin and trying to find the good recipe not to do it. And my question is, do you think it will work? Do you think if we know where we are from and where we are going and know our Creator, is that going to refrain us from sinning? Yes, Daniel, maybe that's not the question you wanted to answer, but please.
It's a comment on that. I'm thinking, what would be the case if we would not know where we come from, and we don't know where we're going, and we have nobody to stand in front of? How would the person act in that case?
Again, if you don't know where you come and you don't know where you're going, but
And you will not stand in front of somebody at the end. How would that person act?
Yes.
Maybe that's also maybe that enlighten us and enlightens us in the answer of the meaning of why he thinks these
Mhm.
three things.
So do you have an answer? What that kind of a person, what would that bring him to do or not to do?
I think it would be maybe it could be result in being a bit lost, because if you don't know where, okay, let's say you don't know where you come from, but if you don't know where you're going, it means that you don't have a direction, but you can still have and if you don't know, and if you're not going to answer for your actions, then maybe you don't have a criteria to answer to. So that may be result in that you may be a bit lost, and that you don't have requirements to answer to. And
Very interesting that maybe what you're saying is, to sum it all up, is that a person comes to sin if he's lost, if he's too lost to understand where he's coming from, where he's going, and who he has to meet in the end. So
yes,
it's very interesting. Yes, thank you.
it's like when you have a child that's playing with his toys all day, and or a child playing with his toys all day, and the parent comes and says, "Don't you remember that you have a test on Friday?" Uh, so that's then the child has something to answer to some days, and suddenly has a purpose too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I hear two things. One is the question of purpose, or the question of, am I lost or do I have a purpose? And the other question is, maybe another thing that you brought up is that a person who sins is a person who doesn't have a clear direction. It's not only that he doesn't have a purpose, but doesn't have a clear direction. And both those things could result in not doing the right thing. Thank you, Daniel. Lior.
Yes, I think when I deliberate and ponder about this matter, I think I kind of like trace three aspects, like for Chazal, or like as far as Chazal concerned, because I think there's like the more social context where they try to, we saw it in the former Mishnayot, where they really try to say there is going to be an account, and they need to sort of like fight all sorts of the different philosophies. Then there's the idea of tshuva that one speaks about all the time. Like if there's like a Talmid Chacham that sins, then we need to assume that he will do tshuva. But then on like the last aspect that is really relates more to your question is the idea of damage control, maybe. So, for example, when we read, like, I don't know, when I'm sitting here a bit with like about Enora and Rambam, and they kind of like try to comment and say what it is we can sort of like minimize. So Rambam speaks, for example, about anava. So isn't it like we speak about, like when we pray, we say that we want to be like the dust, like we want to be. So I think really what they're trying to, like what Akavia ben Ma'alal is trying to say is about like that when perhaps if we have anava, this is going to help us a good way through, and then of course we cannot.
Anava is humility.
Yes. Yes, so maybe that.
So you're reading it and you're saying the general idea that you see here is having humility. If you know where you come from, it gives you some humility. You're not standing only by yourself. You have roots. If you know where you're going, then it promotes also your humility. You have a path that you're going to. You're not standing by yourself in the world. And of course, when you're thinking of standing before God, you're having humility. And a person who has humility will not sin. Maybe because, yeah, why? Why a person who has humility will not sin? Leo, well, can you continue this thought until?
Because if I connect like the different aspects, then a person that is arrogant will, first of all, might not consider that there will be an account, and will sort of like all the time try to achieve more and more, and will not sort of like will not be content in what they have. And a person that has that in a way exaggerates their sense of humility even more so will always be in a way, will always take a step back and try to consider things before acting. And this perhaps when one calls it nowadays mindfulness, I guess this is what it is, but it needs to come from a place where of sort of like humility.
It's, I think if I'm thinking about the two answers that we heard just now, one from Daniel and one from Liol, it's almost as if you are reading this Mishnah in opposite ways. Daniel reads this Mishnah very concentrated around yourself, saying if you really know who you are, where you come from, where you're going, who you're going to stand in front of, you have a strong sense of self, a strong sense of target, then you will not sin. You're focused. You have a target. You have a journey. And Leo maybe says almost the opposite in the same words, right? He says you should know where you come from. It's not about you. It's about the place that you came from. And it's not about you. It's the place that you're going to. And it's not about you. It's the fact that God is standing before of you. That humility, that's what will prevent you from sinning. And I think both answers are valid in the Mishnah. It's very interesting that we're having almost opposite understandings from the same words, and that's actually what learning is about. Learning Torah could bring that. Any other ideas? Any other aspects, views about how what Akavya ben Mararel says? How does it prevent us from sinning? There was someone else who raised their hand, and I don't see them right now. So
Yeah, but it's my Yetta.
yes,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah, but my computer doesn't work with the picture from my home. So yeah, I have a little comment. If you read and study Torah and think about what words you use, your language, then you don't make mistakes. Try to be a good person, as Torah tells us. The 5 book of Moses is filled up with recipes, how you get a good person, with love, with respect for other people, to understand your neighbor, and all these examples. And most of the thinking must be out from you. In the world, you have to meet the world, to meet the neighbor outside yourself, I think.
Yes. I think that Yetta, what you're saying is so true and so clear, but in a way, maybe what Akavya ben Malelel is trying to say, that this is not exactly working, because we are trying to be good people, but we're not always succeeding. We know all the values, all the commandments that God gave us, but sometimes we go in another direction and we do other things. And then what Akavya ben Malelel is trying to ask is, how can we prevent that slippery slope? How can we manage to stay focused, being, like you said, good people, following the laws of the Torah?
Yeah, but you have to prepare your thinking, your philosophy, where you come from, where you are standing, your home and your inside you, then you can handle all these mistakes, or not all of them, but you can jump over and a little bit, and it's better and a good advice.
So that's exactly from where you came, right? So you're
Yeah, in a
explaining.
way, yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
It's
And can
useful.
you continue it to the two other ones?
It's very useful.
Can you continue it to the two other parts? You should know where you're going and whom you will give an account and reckoning.
Yeah, reckoning. What is the best word in English?
Reckoning would be
synonym?
understanding what you did and
No, yeah, okay, yeah. Look behind you. What does, yeah, yeah. You have to make some reflection and think what happened between you and your opposite person, and sit down and use some time. Spend time for it. It's very necessary when you make the Shabbat commandments or the other commandments. You have to think a little bit of what's happened. Yeah.
So what I hear from you, Jette, if I may, maybe I don't know if that's what you meant, but that's where I take what you're saying is a very interesting way of explaining the Mishnah. I never thought about it this way. That you're saying maybe what Akavya ben Malalel is saying is, look at those three things, and you will not come into the hands of the next sin. In other words,
Yeah.
we've sinned now, or we did something good now, right?
Yeah.
We did a certain deed. It could be good, it could be bad. Now, reflecting on where we came from, maybe not only all the way back, but even reflecting on the last minute or what happened to me since a little bit before when I did that deed. And what do I decide to do from now on? And who am I giving an account to? This is what will prevent me to do the next sin. So I don't know if that's what you meant, but I think it's a wonderful explanation to this Mishnah. Lars.
Thank you.
Yes, there is also, in my view, some kind of time limit written into the Mishnah. There is the humility to being a human being, but there's a time we're all going to die, and there's a time between there, and that's where we're going. All of us, our body is going to die, and then we're going to face God's justice or righteousness, and that should be leading and being more careful of what we are doing with that time, with that limited time, and lead us to, when we think about the short or the limited time that we have before we die, that when we stand in front of God and God's righteousness, we know that we must spend that time actively and do things better. That should be. There's also other Mishnahs in this same chapter that kind of help us with more practical things, like being careful with the speech and all that other things, and that kind of hooks into that.
Thank you. So really, Lars, you are bringing us to the second part of the Mishnah that we sort of ignored on purpose. you are forcing us to look into that second part, and really that second part leads us to a whole other discussion that you summed up, I think, very nicely. That where did you come from? From a putrid drop. And where are you going? To a place of dust, worms, and maggots, and before whom you will give an account and a reckoning before the King of Kings, the Holy One. So the second part of the Mishnah gives us an answer that is, I think you summed it up very well. If you know that you are worthless in the beginning and you're worthless in the end, and all you have is this time that you were given to live, then you will not sin. If you keep that in mind all the time, that this minute that I have is the only time that I have to do good, and that without this, the rest of the rest is worthless, then it sort of enables us, or even forces us, to not think about wasting that time on bad deeds. What's interesting is that the Mishnah is not saying it right out. Akavya ben Malalel is playing a little game with us here, right? Because he could have said, and then I don't think there would be a lot of question, exactly like Lars said. He could have said, look in three things, and you will not come into the hands of sin. Know that you come from a putrid drop. Know that you are going to a place of dust and worms, and know that you are standing before God Almighty. Akavya ben Malalel builds it differently. He says first the three questions, and he leaves those questions like that, as a question, as three questions. And then he gives three answers. And I think it's, especially if we're now in a Beit Midrash trying to understand how Mishnah is built, and how can we learn, how can we gather hints from Mishnah, reading not only the first layer, but the second layer. The question is, why did Akavya ben Malalel build it this way? What is the idea of leaving those questions open, all three of them, before you give the answer? And maybe it is because Rabbi Akiva ben Malalel exactly wanted us to go through this journey that we went through here, to ask these questions without hearing his answer, asking those questions in a higher level, asking those questions, know where you come from. What does it mean to me where I came from? In the end, he will say, you're from a putrid drop. But before that, I have to leave this question resonating with me. And in a way, I think that the question is less practical than the answer, but is taking us to a different realm. Maybe what Akavya ben Malalel is saying is asking, where am I from, all the time? Asking, where am I going, all the time? Not having a specific answer, just asking. And asking, who am I going to stand before? The constant asking of that question, that is what will prevent us from sin. If I'm questioning if I'm asking those questions every minute of my life, that could prevent us from sin without getting to where Akavya ben Malalel leads us in the end. And there are quite a few commentators who actually say that the first part of the Mishnah is for stronger people, or for people that have more spiritual ability to ask those questions without Akavya ben Malalel's answer. Akavya ben Malalel's answer is for the weakest, for those who can't have, who are not finding the strength to have elevating answers. That's actually what a few commentators, Midrash Shmuel says it, and a few others, that the second part of the answer of Akabe ben Malalel is not an uplifting answer, but a frightening answer, an answer that will make us prevent us from doing sin through fear. I'm not going to do sin because God is going to check what I did, and I know that I came from nothing, and I'm going to nothing, and all what I have is this life, and I shouldn't waste it, and I shouldn't, but that's the second part. That comes from fear. The first part, the part that leaves the question open, this is preventing ourselves from sin in a positive way, in a way of love. Know where you come from, know what your journey is, know where you're going, like the answers that that you answered here, which were beautiful answers, and I think they were uplifting answers that could help us prevent ourselves from sin in an uplifting way and not in a frightening way like the second part of the Mishnah. Daniel, you wanted to say something.
Yes, I would like to continue on comment on Lars' answer and also on your answer, because I think the answer it's to summarize also is that we become aware, we get awareness in our life, that we are aware of our actions, and that we are aware of God, and I'd like to connect that to doing mitzvot, because when we do a mitzvah, I think we remind ourselves of God. For example, if we are honoring Shabbat, we remind ourselves of God. If we decide not to eat shrimp, then we remind ourselves of God. And in other words, it's an awareness that the mitzvot give us.
Thank you. Yes, and in that sense, really, maybe you're trying to say that the difference between the first part and the second part, as I presented it, is not so strong. They're both giving us awareness in different ways. Thank you. Gisa Sarah.
It's just a comment, and you can please correct me if I'm wrong, but we're supposed to have a constant connection to Hashem.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally, I'm not saying that other people is wrong, I'm just saying that personally, I don't think that I'm supposed to be responsible for my actions and be afraid of anything like that, especially only after I die, because I think I have to be responsible and I have to answer to Hashem every single day of my life, because I'm in connection with him. So I'm supposed to answer and to show him the best version of myself every single day, not for fear, not by fearing, and not thinking that the day when I die, I will have the biggest, judgment. No, I don't. I think every single day, because Hashem trusts us when he returns our neshama every morning to us. He trusted us one more day. He trusted us more and more days, and more months, and more years. He trusted us life. It means that he is actually connecting every day to us. And the only thing I say, the only way I say, it's like more you strengthen your connection and more you try to follow. I don't say only mitzvahs, but you try to follow. How could I even pick the right word? But more you try to follow the right way, the fair way, in general in your life, in doing things, not only just concerning other person, but also concerning to you, to you, because we can sin against ourselves. Not only, we can harm ourselves. We don't only do harm to other people, but also to ourselves. And most of the time we do first to ourselves. We hurt ourselves. Sometimes we even don't respect ourselves. So I think by building, by straightening, by making it stronger, this connection, we could, or we might find the right way to also to avoid things, to avoiding doing wrong things. That's just what I think. I'm not saying that's right, but just what I think.
Thank you. I think that maybe you underlined another difference between the first part and the second part of the Mishnah, because the second part of the Mishnah brings this presence of God in the context of where you started and where you finish, the end of life, right? Saying in the end of the life, you're going to give account before God. So this really comes from fear. And what you are saying, I think, could be read very beautifully in the first part. You should know where you're coming from, where you're going, not in the sense of the lifespan, but in the sense of every minute. And then the account that you're giving towards God is not an account of all your life where you're asking, will I be punished or will I be rewarded? But a constant asking of, am I before God? What does that mean that I'm standing before God? Am I standing before God as much as I am able or not? So I don't know if that's exactly what you meant, but I think it's amazingly put inside this analysis of the two parts of the Mishnah.
Yeah,
So thank you.
that's what I meant. Thank you.
Yes, Lior.
I'd like to offer a very optimistic reading of the last part.
Yes.
Because when I look at
Save us, Leo.
Because the text, like the Mishnah is kind of like speaking of, like kind of like flowery language, saying like melech malchei melachim, like choosing this epithet for this specific situation, this specific case is a sort of, yes, you are dust, and like you come from a putrid drop, you go into the maggots and to the dust, but you have the opportunity to be like, you have this amazing honor to be put in front the king of the supreme king. And you get a sort of like, it's a huge respect, it's huge honor, in spite of what you are, you're like we're nothing, and then we get this honor. It might actually be a very, very optimistic way to look at it, like having such a great honor and trying to sort of like make use of it. And again, when I read Rambam, and he speaks about like the three different parts, like he speaks about the putrid drop, then he speaks about like the maggots, and he speaks about humility, and he speaks about scorning the world is like the next stage. But then he says about the third stage, like the like standing in front of Hashem. Then he really says this will make one think about this, the magnitude and the extent of the mitzvah. And this might be that, like it's actually pretty optimistic because we get an opportunity to do something in spite of our being dust and so on and so forth.
Yes, thank you. So you're saying, yes, it is much more optimistic. You're saying God cares for me. I will stand before God even though I'm worth nothing. Now, realizing that, how magnificent it is to live, and how a shame it will be to have a sin. Something like that.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a beautiful understanding here in the Mishnah. We have 10 more minutes, and I wanted to share with you that when I read the Mishnah, I couldn't help but remembering a very interesting saying that also deals with how can we refrain from sinning. Let's see, how can I share that? Yeah, so we won't get into the whole context. This sentence can be learned by itself. Even though the context is obviously, like always, very, very interesting. Reish Lakish says, a man commits a transgression only if a spirit of folly enters him. And he gives, this is the chapter of Sotah. So it's about the woman that is that her husband thinks that she betrayed him. But let's just look at this sentence. A man commits a transgression only if a spirit of folly, ruach shtut, enters him. And on first glance, it seems like a very strange kind of sentence. Committing a sin, committing a transgression is something so serious. How can you say that it's a spirit of folly that brings this transgression? But when you read the different commentators, and I think it was a lot dealt with this, then one of the explanations I like most is saying that basically we commit a sin when we are not focused. And this is exactly what Akavia ben Malalel said. You should know what is before you, what was before, where are you going. The idea is to know. The idea is to stay focused. And any person who is doing a sin, he is not focused. He is not focused. And it's interesting to see it also backwards. When I committed a sin, in Chassidut they explain this mishpat, this sentence saying, if I committed a sin, it means that I wasn't aware enough of God. Because every person that is enough aware of God, that God's presence is aware in his life, a lot like Gisa Sarah said before and others here, you can't sin. You can't stand before God and sin. It's not a possibility even. If I was in constant recognition that I, Natan, am standing before God Almighty, and he, not from fear, not that he will punish me if I'm doing something bad, but he is with me all the time, not only with me, but in different schools of Jewish thought. My soul is a godly soul. I am part of God. And what does it mean that a part of God decides to do the opposite of God's will? This comes only because the person got out of focus. The person for a second forgot that he is godly. For a second, he left his awareness on the side. And that doesn't mean that we're not having responsibility for what we did, but it means that any sin that we're doing, in a way, it wasn't exactly us. It was us without a mind. It was us with a spirit of folly. And working on the awareness, working on knowing, working on having this sense every minute of the day that we and God are one, and God is watching, and God is with me, and God is expecting from me, and God is counting on me. This awareness, a person with that awareness will not ever commit a sin. And that's what different rabbis said, that this is the big challenge of God being hidden from us. If God was present in a real way, in a materialistic way, we would never sin, because we can't, sitting in an office, God sit in the chair next to me, I can't sin. I will never sin. If a great person sits next to me, I will be aware of it so much I will never do things that are not according to his wish. I would want to please him. So the reason for us committing sins is a weak awareness, an awareness that wasn't there all the time. And I think that may be a positive call, because it means that we're not exactly doomed to go by what our heart wants, or but what our desires want. Our desires can be a tool that comes from this awareness, and this is exactly Akava ben Malalel's beginning. You know, one of the famous questions about this Mishnah is, why didn't Akava ben Malalel say only the last part? It would have been enough, right? If Akava ben Malalel said, there's one thing you have to know and you won't commit a sin. Know that you're standing before God Almighty. Why do we need, if we have this third part, why do we need know where you're coming from and where you're going? And one of the answers is that I need to know where I'm coming from and where I'm going, because this awareness of God has to be inside the reality. It has to be inside this everyday life that I have. If I'm only to keep this awareness of God in an abstract way, is very, very, very hard. But if I know where I'm coming from, I'm asking all the time, now in this point of life, where did I come from? And I'm asking myself, where am I going to? Then the constant question would be again and again and again and again, why is this all for? And what is this all for? And this is the awareness of God. So yeah, this was Akavia ben Malalel's big question. How can I refrain from sin? And we could try it in whatever explanation that was heard today in this Beit Midrash. And thank you for everyone who participated, for everyone who wanted to participate but didn't do it in the end. And also for those who didn't feel like participating out loud, but I'm sure participated in their thoughts and in their inner beings. So good evening and thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you
bye.
so
Good evening.
much.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Good
Lovely.
afternoon.
Lovely.
להתראות.
תודה רבה.